So normally I try to do a Halloween video every year because, like many adults who are now experiencing their renaissance goth years into their late 20s, I like spooky things and spooky games. Though you may have noticed I sort of missed the mark on that by a few weeks, so whatever. But as I look back at the games I played growing up, I see that this was clearly not the case as a kid, because aside from games like Resident Evil 4, I really didn't play too many horror games. So, because of that, I'm instead gonna make a video about one of the scariest stories to grace the 7th console generation. A game that has essentially become a myth and legend, and one that I most definitely cannot find words to describe how awful it is, that have not been said more eloquently elsewhere. But do you want to know what the scariest part of this video is going to be? I'm going to attempt something that most would find unthinkable, save for the minds of zealots and hedgehog fanatics. I'm going to say something positive about it. Sonic the Hedgehog, or rather Sonic 06 as internet vernacular has dubbed it, is probably one of the most objectively bad games I have ever played. This is neither a controversial nor brave statement, but it does resonate with me on a personal level because I'm something of a Sonic apologist. The notion that 3D Sonic games are always bad was something that I shrugged off back in my middle school and high school years because even if other people I knew did not enjoy these games, I still did, and quite frankly still do. Honestly, when it comes down to a game's quality, I will always maintain that the most important aspect for the player is whether or not they had fun, which is why I have no problem saying that this game is horseshit. Like many other 3D Sonic games that came before it, the game was split into a multiple story campaign structure with a last story epilogue chapter tacked on to the end, where you would then have a Super Saiyan Hedgehog fight with the resident god of destruction or whatever inappropriately placed JRPG villain you were going to be fighting that year. The 3 campaigns focused on Sonic himself, his anti-heroic counterpart Shadow, and the resident newcomer Silver the Hedgehog. Each campaign was meant to have a specific playstyle, with Sonic being focused on platforming with the occasional on-rails high-speed sequence, Shadow who mostly focused on awkward combat and vehicular segments with guns, because that was apparently what he was supposed to be known for now. And then of course there was Silver's campaign, which focused on using his unexplained psychic powers to manipulate objects in his environment and use them to defeat enemies and solve puzzles. None of these campaigns were completely unplayable, but every single one lacked the polish that a AAA game should have, and thus all were an unsatisfying to downright miserable experience to play. And yet, despite that, I do recall finding some enjoyment in this game, and it came from the route that I did not expect it to, that being Silver's campaign. Silver's campaign is something of an antithesis of what most people would think that a Sonic game should be about. Silver isn't fast, he doesn't jump on enemies to defeat them, and he most certainly is not way past cool. Instead, each level of Silver's campaign slowly involves making your way towards the goal and defeating enemies by picking up crates and things and tossing them at them. Or better yet, catching their own projectiles and chucking them back into their face for some good old poetic justice. Silver could also do that thing that seems like half of Sonic's supporting cast can do while he cannot, which is simulate flight. And he can also occasionally use his powers at specific points to create bridges out of miscellaneous debris and objects, or do something like catapult himself off a steel girder to advance. Honestly, none of this is pushing the envelope when it comes to telekinesis. Really, you could probably get most of this just by picking up an X-Men comic book, and Silver's campaign was not free of the numerous technical problems that the other 2 campaigns had either. And yet, Silver's campaign was still the one that I found the most enjoyment of when playing this game, and by the end of it, it was the one that I wish had been better polished and had more focus because of that. To understand why, I decided to break down these 3 points that I brought up earlier. I know it might be considered sacrilege to like a Sonic character that is not focused on speed, but this actually was one of the more positive aspects that I found about Silver's campaign, at least when compared to the other 2 characters. Plus, any character is better than playing fishing games as you know who. If we're being real, this is probably more of a result of how poorly this game is made and how much more likely it is for the other characters to eat dirt as a result of running into walls that attempt to run fast in this poorly coded mess. Silver doesn't have that problem because his gameplay moves at a leisurely pace, and as a result, it kind of helps prevent some of the obvious cracks from showing of a game that clearly never made it out of beta. Silver's control scheme made me feel like I had more, well, control, opposed to the chaotic mess that was Sonic's playstyle or whatever the hell Shadow's gameplay was supposed to be. Oddly enough, this also fit into the narrative of Silver's powers, considering that his entire shtick was using his telekinesis to seize control of things and manipulate them to his advantage, sometimes even using another character's own strength against them.
It's no use!
He's also a time traveler, which narratively usually revolves around a character trying to avoid a specific fate and take their destiny into their own hands. Am I looking too deep into the character analysis of a character named Silver the Hedgehog? Yes, I probably am. You may start typing your comment now. Say what you want about it being overdone at this point, but I have always found the concept of telekinesis to be a really cool power, and any video game that tries to use it as an ability that the player has, which allows them to grab enemies and throw them around, or catch enemy projectiles and toss them back into their face, is really fun and cathartic to me. Several games have done it, some with much better results, but this was something I did thoroughly enjoy about Silver's campaign, even when the game was trying to make sure I wouldn't. Catching enemy missiles and blowing up robots with them never gets old to me, nor did seizing enemies themselves and throwing them into a wall, even if it didn't always work exactly as intended. I also enjoyed Silver's own movement abilities, namely his hover power, which allowed him to clear large gaps even though it would drain faster than the like/dislike ratio on a live-action video game trailer. This would sometimes lead to you underestimating a jump and running out of energy just short of where you were going and then falling to your death. Luckily in that last one, you might have enough energy to turn around and go back from whence you came, which is another thing I liked about Silver's movement over Shadow and Sonic in this game. The hover power gives you just enough leeway to course correct and get back to solid ground most of the time. It's kind of like delaying your movie several months to make your main character less horrifying to look at. Alright, so this last one sounds really weird to list as a positive, but hear me out before you hit dislike. Sonic has always been this kid appeal character of what a cool guy is. He's strong, he's fearless, and he always saves the day while making smart-ass comments. He's the guy that every kid on the playground wants to play as at recess because of these reasons. Then there's Shadow, who is another version of a kid appeal character for several of the same reasons, but in a way where he's darker and edgier, and thus the antithesis of Sonic, which makes people look at him and think that he's cool. Silver is not cool. He has a nasally voice, he's easily manipulated by the true villain into doing his bidding, and most importantly, he's openly antagonistic to Sonic and Shadow, who are very clearly on the right side of the conflict throughout the game. Silver is a character that is hard to like. In fact, in-game, there are only two characters that he forms real bonds with throughout the story, one being his friend from the future, whom he has already known for a long time, and the other being Amy, who only actually approaches him at first because she is apparently both colorblind and face-blind. So from a narrative standpoint, Silver seems like he's intentionally written to be kind of a knob, in stark contrast to his two counterparts, Sonic and Shadow. He's a character that is supposed to be on the wrong side of the conflict, but eventually come over to the side of the light after clashing with the heroes and having his ideals challenged, which is exactly what happens and is why I like Silver's story arc the most out of the three. Silver starts out as an antagonist for Sonic because Silver wants to kill him, but Silver wants to kill Sonic because he thinks it will save his future. And sure enough, by the end of the game, he figures out another way to deal with his giant fire demon problem that doesn't involve murder, but instead sacrifice. Not his sacrifice, but sacrifice. This is probably another reason that people hate Silver. His campaign ends up killing one of the most well-liked characters in the game, whose gameplay is also not broken to all hell and is genuinely fun to play as. I like characters that experience character development, and that's why I like Silver's story arc the most out of the three campaigns. Shadow comes to a close second because I enjoy the dynamic that he has with Rouge and Omega, and Sonic comes in dead last, mostly because nothing really changes with Sonic as a character. because that's kind of how Sonic is written in general. He can't change, he can't grow. Sonic will always be the hero, always come out on top, and always end the game in pretty much the same state he started as. And I don't think the series suffers from that, since Sonic games are not about the narrative, they're not that deep, but that doesn't mean I won't comment on it or find more enjoyment in another character's arc when this particular game wants to put so much emphasis on the narrative. And really, that's one of the many issues that Sonic 06 suffered from, that being that it put too much emphasis on trying to tell some grand RPG-esque story in a game about freaking anthropomorphic hedgehogs that wear sneakers and eat chili dogs. So, is Silver's campaign good? No. No. Nothing about this game is what I would classify as good. Except maybe the music, but it's hard to mess up butt rock in my opinion. Silver's campaign is by no means excused from the numerous other technical and design conflicts that plague this game, but at the very least it was the one I enjoyed the most when playing, which again is not a very high bar to pass. Something kind of neat that I did happen across in the process of writing this video, though, is that I discovered that a user named ChaosX is actually making a full remake of Sonic 06 on the PC. And honestly, it actually looks pretty freaking good so far, so I'm excited to watch and see how that turns out. I would never recommend this game, but I would recommend finding a game that puts Silver's playstyle into something else. Something that wasn't Sonic, because on paper the whole telekinesis power set is a lot of fun to play around with. And I guess someone had the same idea, because apparently a game came out recently that basically stars a character that plays like Silver, except they gave him red hair, a gun, called the game something different, and you know, turned him into a human woman.
Chaos Control!